By June 1943, the Wehrmacht faced a strategic conundrum that would define the remainder of the war. The destruction of the 6th Army at Stalingrad 5 months earlier had cost Germany 300,000 men and shattered the myth of invincibility. German high command needed a victory, not merely for tactical advantage, but to demonstrate that the Wehrmacht remained capable of offensive operations that could dictate the tempo of the war. The Kursk salient presented what appeared to be an irresistible target. A 200-kilometer-wide bulge in Soviet lines offered the classic pincer opportunity. If German forces struck simultaneously from north and south, they could trap hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops in a pocket, replicating the encirclements of 1941. Yet the operation contained fatal contradictions from conception. General Heinz Guderian warned explicitly against launching the attack. His concerns centered on the new Panther and Tiger tanks, machines that offered qualitative superiority but existed in insufficient numbers. The Panthers, rushed into production, suffered mechanical failures that kept maintenance crews working through the night. If you're interested in how wars are actually decided by logistics, math, and doctrine, subscribe now, turn on notifications, and stay tuned for more in-depth World War analysis. Let's continue. Guderian understood that Germany's industrial capacity could not replace losses at the rate the Eastern Front consumed them. Adolf Hitler vacillated through May and June, postponing the operation repeatedly to accumulate more armor. Each week of delay allowed Soviet intelligence to confirm German intentions. Red Army engineers excavated 8 defensive belts, some extending 40 kilometers deep. They planted 400,000 mines across sectors where German armor would advance. Marshal Georgy Zhukov positioned reserves behind the salient, preparing not merely to defend, but to launch counteroffensives that would exploit German overextension. Between April and July 1943, Zhukov's forces transformed the salient into the most heavily fortified position on Earth. Trench systems snaked across the steppe in 8 successive defensive belts extending to depths of 240 kilometers. The first belt alone incorporated anti-tank ditches 3 meters deep, their excavated earth piled into berms for concealed gun positions. The PTOP, anti-tank strongpoint, formed the cellular structure of this layered network. Each consisted of 4 to 6 anti-tank guns positioned in mutually supporting arcs, surrounded by infantry trenches and pre-registered artillery fire zones. Engineers cited these strong points to channel advancing panzers into predetermined killing corridors. Minefields bordered these channels, funneling attackers toward registered fire coordinates. The defenders positioned their T-34s in hull-down positions behind reverse slopes, while heavier Su-152 self-propelled guns, nicknamed Animal Killer, waited in concealed positions, their 152mm howitzers capable of cracking open Tiger and Panther armor at close range. By July, the salient had ceased to be merely terrain. It had become an engineered killing zone, every meter calculated to exact maximum cost from the attackers. At 4:30 hours on July 5, 1943, E-Model's 9th Army Artillery opens fire, hundreds of guns hammering Soviet forward positions. The barrage comes 2 hours after the Soviets' own preemptive strike at 2:20, when 20,000 guns attempted to shatter German assembly areas. The mutual bombardments transformed the northern shoulder into a cauldron of overlapping fires. At first light, the tracked behemoths lurch forward. Panzer IV medium tanks roll alongside the heavier Ferdinand tank destroyers. Overhead, Ju-87. G-1 Stukas dive with specialized 37mm cannon, silencing Soviet artillery batteries. The anti-tank Stukas proved devastatingly effective in these opening hours. The German machines grind forward 4 kilometers by day's end, a penetration that barely scratches the surface of the defense-in-depth system. The cost becomes clear as darkness falls. 200 of Model's 300 tanks lie damaged or destroyed, a catastrophic 67% casualty rate in a single day. Mines account for many losses. Anti-tank guns positioned in mutually supporting networks destroy others. The mathematics are brutal. 4 kilometers purchased with 200 tanks yields 500 meters per 100 vehicles lost. The northern pincer, designed to drive deep and meet Hoth's 4th Panzer Army at Kursk, has instead collided with a defensive system engineered to absorb and bleed attackers. Dawn breaks on July 6th. Model's 9th Army shifts tactics. The frontal bludgeoning gives way to methodical advances toward 3 critical strongpoints: Dubrova Village, Teploi, and Hill 272. These objectives form the gateway to Oboyan, now 12 miles distant. Soviet commanders commit the 2nd Tank Army to a counterattack. The tactical mathematics are brutal. Soviet T-34s, each requiring 40,000 worker hours to construct, face Tigers mounting 88mm guns and frontal armor exceeding 100mm thickness. Tiger crews engage at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters, distances where T-34 main guns achieve minimal penetration. Soviet vehicles close the gap or die trying. Some reach effective range, most do not. By July 7th, Grossdeutschland breaks into Dubrova. Street fighting consumes the village. Hill 272 and Teploi become focal points for July 8th's grinding attrition. The 2nd Tank Army's counterattack has failed to restore the front, but it bleeds German momentum. July 9th marks the high water mark. Model's advance reaches within 12 miles of Oboyan. Behind this achievement lies a steel graveyard. 500 Soviet tanks destroyed across 3 days. The price has stalled the German timetable by 72 critical hours. 80 miles to the south, Hoth's 4th Panzer Army had been driving through its own series of defensive belts. By July 11th, Hoth redirected his armored spearhead, 600 tanks of 2nd SS Panzer Corps, toward the small railway junction of Prokhorovka. The terrain offered relatively open ground for maneuver warfare. Soviet Stavka recognized the threat. The 5th Guards Tank Army, under Lieutenant General Pavel Rotmistrov, received orders to deploy into blocking positions. The force comprised over 600 armored vehicles. The Soviet deployment occurred during the night of July 11th to 12th. Are columns of armor moving into assembly areas less than 3 kilometers from German forward positions. At 3:20 on July the 12th, the thunder of Operation Kutuzov's opening barrage rolled across the northern sector. 3,000 guns announcing a major Soviet offensive against the Orel Bulge. While Model's 9th Army now faced a collapsing rear area, Hoth's forces at Prokhorovka remained committed to their attack. The meeting engagement began shortly after dawn. Soviet doctrine called for aggressive counterattack at close range, negating the superior optics and main gun penetration of the German heavies. Rotmistrov's tanks surged forward, closing the distance to force point-blank engagement. The collision involved approximately 1,200 armored vehicles, the largest single-day concentration of armor in military history to that point. To 2,000 kilometers from the smoke of Prokhorovka, Adolf Hitler receives confirmation of the Allied landings in Sicily. Operation Husky has begun on July 10. 160,000 British and American troops are ashore on Italian soil. The strategic calculus shifts instantly. At the Wolf's Lair, Hitler convenes his commanders on July 13th. Field Marshal von Manstein argues for continuation. His southern pincer remains operationally viable. Soviet counterattacks have been costly. Rotmistrov's 5th Guards Tank Army mauled to the point where Stalin will consider removing him from command. Manstein believes the Red Army is breaking. The northern situation tells a different story. Model's advance sits frozen 12 miles short of its objective. Operation Kutuzov now threatens the entire Orel salient behind Model's army, or Hitler weighs the contradiction. Germany cannot sustain simultaneous crises. The Führer cancels Operation Citadel. Elite SS divisions will redeploy to Italy. Manstein's protest is direct. Stopping the attack is tantamount to throwing away a victory. The assessment reveals the fundamental divergence between tactical and strategic vision. Manstein sees the battlefield. Hitler sees the map of Europe. The cancellation occurs while fighting continues at Prokhorovka, German and Soviet armor still locked at point-blank range. The last German offensive in the east ends not with a decisive engagement, but with a headquarters decision driven by Allied action 2,000 kilometers distant. July 12, 1943. 0320 hours. 3,000 guns and mortars erupt along the Western Front's sector opposite the Orel salient. The barrage opens as a rolling wave of detonations, the sound building from individual cracks into a sustained roar that compresses the air itself. Marshal Rokossovsky's objective: collapse the Orel salient that protrudes into Soviet territory. The German Ninth Army occupies this bulge, the same formation that launched Operation Citadel's northern pincer just 7 days earlier. German units in the salient exist in tactical paradox. Model's mobile reserves have been committed to the offensive thrust southward. The formations holding the salient's northern and eastern faces consist primarily of infantry divisions, lacking the concentrated armor necessary to counterattack Soviet breakthrough attempts. Soviet rifle divisions advance behind T-34 tanks. Western Front commits 11 armies to the operation. On the strategic calculus, Model cannot simultaneously attack southward toward Kursk and defend Orel's lengthening perimeter. On July 13th, as Hitler formally cancels Operation Citadel, Model confronts a catastrophe. By July 15th, he strips every available Panzer unit from 9th Army's assault formations, redirecting them northward. Each German division holds frontages exceeding 20 kilometers, triple the recommended defensive density. The Panzer unit's model redirects arrive depleted. Battalions that departed with 96 operational tanks now count 40. IL-2. Sturmovix dominate the skies, their 37mm underwing cannons penetrating the thinner roof armor of German tanks moving in column formation. By July 18th, Model's redeployment proves insufficient. The 9th Army withdraws to its July 5th starting positions, abandoning every meter of ground purchased with a week of offensive operations. On July 18th, the German 9th Army abandons its forward positions. The withdrawal is methodical. Rear guards cover the pullback while engineers destroy bridges. 5 days of territorial gains evaporate in hours. The spatial geometry reverses. Villages that required combined arms assaults to capture are vacated without a shot. By July 23rd, German forces in the southern protrusion return to their original jumping-off points. Operation Citadel's territorial ledger balances at 0. Every captured trench reverts to Soviet control. German engineers wire demolition charges beneath rail junctions east of Orel on July 26th. The city that anchored Wehrmacht operations since October 1941 empties. On August 5th, forward battalions from the Bryansk front enter the city center. The liberation comes not through dramatic assault, but through sustained operational pressure. At 2400 hours Moscow time, the Soviet capital erupts with a 224-gun artillery salute, the first such salute of the war. Throughout the final week of July, Red Army logistics battalions converge on assembly areas south of the recaptured Kursk salient. 6,000 guns roll into camouflaged firing positions. The scale dwarfs previous Soviet offensives. More tubes concentrated per kilometer than Stalingrad. At 0500 hours on August 3rd, the artillery preparation begins. 6,000 guns open fire simultaneously. The barrage rolls forward in timed lifts as assault battalions advance behind the curtain of exploding steel. Our German positions around Belgorod vanish under concentrations that pulverize trenches and collapse bunkers. The breakthrough achieves its objectives within hours. Tank armies exploit the gaps, pouring through sectors where overstretched divisions cannot establish continuous fronts. By August 7th, lead elements reach Bogodukov, 112 kilometers beyond the start line. On August 11th, lead battalions of the 1st Guards Tank Army reached the Kharkov-Poltava Railway, the primary logistics artery feeding German forces. Within 2 hours, explosions crater the roadbed across 4 kilometers. Supply trains destined for Kharkov sit immobile. The Soviet advance threatens to pocket 4 divisions with approximately 45,000 troops against the northern Donets River. By August 15th, the gap between Kharkov and German lines measures 42 kilometers. On August the 23rd, at 0230 hours, Soviet forces penetrate the final German defensive positions on Kharkov's northern perimeter. The city, contested 4 times since October 1941, falls to the Red Army in its definitive capture. German losses in the Orel salient alone reached 200,000 men. Across all sectors of the Kursk battle and subsequent counteroffensives, Wehrmacht casualties approached 500,000. The figures included 500 tanks destroyed or abandoned. Entire divisions limped westward as skeletal formations, their combat power reduced to battalion level. The Red Army's butcher's bill ran far higher. Soviet casualty returns documented 863,000 men lost during the defensive phase and counteroffensives combined. Tank losses exceeded 6,000 machines. Though Soviet factories already churned out replacements at rates German industry could not match. The disparity reflected different operational realities. German defenders fought from prepared positions during the retreat. Soviet rifle divisions absorbed horrific losses, storming fortified lines. Near Ponieri, a Panther's transmission seized. The final drive gears, stressed beyond their engineering tolerances, welded themselves together through friction and heat. This scene repeated across the salient. At Kursk, mechanical breakdowns eliminated more German heavy armor than Soviet guns. The Panther's engine generated 700 horsepower, but the final drives, designed for a lighter vehicle, shattered under operational stress. The Tiger's 88mm gun could kill a T-34 at 2 kilometers, forcing Soviet crews to adopt boarding tactics, closing to ramming distance where armor advantage meant nothing. But immunity from frontal fire proved meaningless when the beast couldn't move. Porsche's creation, the Elephant, embodied a different failure. Tactical blindness engineered into steel. 68 tons, an 88mm gun capable of destroying any Soviet tank at extreme range, and no machine gun. None. Soviet infantry discovered this deficit at close range, approaching with magnetic mines and Molotov cocktails. Against this complexity, the Soviets fielded simplicity multiplied. The T-34's 76mm gun couldn't penetrate Tiger armor frontally, but T-34s arrived in dozens where one German heavy tank appeared. The factories beyond the Urals produced tanks faster than German workshops could repair transmissions. By August 5th, the technical verdict had rendered itself. German engineering had produced masterpieces of individual capability that broke down under operational reality. Soviet engineering had produced adequate weapons in overwhelming numbers. Complexity defeated by mass. Perfection defeated by sufficiency. The offensive machine that rolled across France in 40 days, that drove to the gates of Moscow in 5 months, now dedicates its remaining strength to retreat and fortification. The Panzer, Kyle, the wedge formation that shattered Soviet lines in 1941 and 1942, dissolves against Soviet anti-tank strongpoints. German armor no longer penetrates. It covers withdrawals. The Eastern Front becomes a one-way mechanism. Soviet offensives generate German withdrawals. German counterattacks attempt to stabilize crumbling positions, never to regain lost ground. The initiative passes permanently to the Red Army. Adolf Hitler's earlier admission to his staff crystallizes into strategic reality. Whenever I think of the attack, my stomach turns over. The Führer, who built his military reputation on offensive audacity, now presides over defensive disintegration. From August 1943 forward, German strategic planning abandons conquest. Every decision serves one purpose: postponing the inevitable westward march of Soviet tanks and the artillery salvos that will eventually sound not in Moscow, but in Berlin. The strategic conundrum Germany faced in June 1943, how to demonstrate that the Wehrmacht remained capable of offensive operations, had been answered definitively at Kursk, at Orel, at Belgorod, and finally at Kharkov. The answer was that it could not. The Red Army, a bloodied but unbroken at the war's outset, now held not just the initiative but the future itself. The strategic conundrum Germany faced in June had been answered definitively, and the answer was retreat. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more World War II historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.